Hello, my name is Mary Bradshaw, and I will be presenting North American societal changes between 1820 and 1850. This was known as the pre-Civil War era, a time when social reform soared to new heights and religion spread rapidly, a time when women decided to speak up for themselves, and when the abolition of slavery became the main political focus. All of these and more will be discussed in the next few slides. Between the 1820s and 1850s, a movement was sweeping through the eastern coast of America. It was a growth movement that saw two cities with nearly 100,000 people grow to be six cities with nearly double that. This was not due to a baby boom. It was due to immigration. People, mainly from Europe, came to America for many reasons, such as poorly crops due to weather, famine, religious persecution, and cruel landlords. Due to the expansion of cities, social classes changed as well. Prior to the 1800s, most families were regulated according to patriarchal traditions, but since cities and industries grew, the social class was then categorized in upper, middle, and lower classes. These classes were then based on wages earned, where one lived, worked, interacted, and traveled. The upper class were the rich elites. The middle class were the blue-collar workers, and the lower class were the poorest of them all. Because there were so many people looking for jobs, industrialization skyrocketed. Textiles and urban workshops were leading businesses where even women and children were employed to keep costs low. Then the Working Men's Party appeared in 1827. Mostly, this party worked with like-minded politicians and fought for public funding for education, but what they really wanted were 10-hour workdays and better wages. In 1834, activists formed the General Trades Union to better assist over 25,000 workers. Eventually, these parties fell through during the First Great Depression. The Panic of 1837 was a financial crisis that touched off a major recession. Government funds were then withdrawn from the bank. This panic caused a Great Depression. Thousands of people lost everything. These are the most prominent members during the industrialization period. Andrew Jackson was president during the beginning of the Panic of 1837, and some people accused him of being the reason behind it. Thomas Skidmore was the co-founder and leader of the Working Men's Party in New York City. Martin Van Buren had then taken presidency in 1837 during a time of the economic depression. Van Buren took no blame for the Panic of 1837, instead placing blame on greedy Americans. Robert Dale Owen was one of the leader of the Working Men's Party in New York as well, but unlike other politicians, Owen had opposed slavery. Religion expanded. More specific, Protestant religion expanded. The Second Great Awakening was the second revival of its kind. This movement offered a great deal of missionary activity and conversions. Because men converted, so did women. They believed in God and wanted it known. It doesn't stop there. During a time of slavery, African Americans appeared in churches and at camp meetings as well. Our books tells us that they built 15 churches in Philadelphia alone. All who believed in God believed in equality. Then the temperance movement came along. This movement brought about alcoholism and moderation. Its spread was dominated through the religious movement, eventually leading to its ban. Lastly, Transcendentalism emerged in 1835. This movement was a reaction to protest against the general state of intellectualism and spirituality. The core belief of Transcendentalism was the inherent goodness of people and nature. These are key figures during the religious movement. Charles Grandison Finney played a prominent role during the Second Great Awakening. He is noted as being the leader of the revivals. Joseph Smith grew out of the Second Great Awakening as Mormon. He is the founder of Mormonism. William Miller also grew out of the Second Great Awakening. as the founder of Millerism. Millerism is basically Second-day Adventist. William Ellery Channing was a Unitarian preacher whose thoughts and ideas were among chief influences of Transcendentalism. Then we have Margaret Fuller, whose journalism and advocacy for women's rights earned her a spot in the Transcendental Club, which rebelled against the past and believed in the possibility of change. Lastly, there's Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was a miraculous author who believed humans and nature shared an intimate bond, which led him into the idea of transcendentalism. So much has happened leading into the development of change. The Reformation period led to basic changes in education, mental health, women's rights, and slavery. People saw injustices in the American society, so the people worked hard to abolish those injustices. Education was offered to everyone, men and women, so they could make educated decisions. Persons with mental illness were often locked away in jails, so people pushed to get better treatment for the sick. Women changed how they were treated and viewed by men, and slavery was coming to an end. Utopian communities arose during this time frame as well. These communities brought about a sense of safety to the people. It consisted of a group of people who were attempting to establish new social patterns based upon visions of the ideal society. There were many important people in this section as well. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is known for leading the 1848 Reformation of women's rights, which led to women being able to vote. Sojourner Truth, Lucretia Mott, and Harriet Tubman were leading ladies in the abolishment of slavery and women's rights. The Grimke sisters taught women's rights. They were the only known white Southern women to be a part of the abolition movement. Frances Wright was a social reformer who founded the Neshoba Commune in Tennessee. She wanted the government to offer free boarding schools and was an advocate for birth control and sexual freedom of women. She worked alongside Robert Owen, a social reformer and founder of a New Harmony socialistic community. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in Maryland and later became a freed licensed preacher in 1839. He also delivered a speech at the location of the Underground Railroad. Lastly, there's a radical Quaker named Amy Post. She fought for women and men to have equal rights. Post was also against slavery. This section is aimed at abolitionism and women's rights. Abolitionism is the movement to end the slave trade in the Atlantic and to free slaves. This anti-slavery movement garnered a lot of attention from the general public and politicians. A way for the movement to be globally known was through the Liberator. This was a newspaper geared towards abolitionism. It was more religious than political and demanded them to fight for freedom of slaves. It also announced the Compromise of 1850, which transferred part of the territory claimed by the state to the federal government. It declared California a free state, strengthened the fugitive slave trade, announced the abolition of slave trade in Washington, D.C., and the federal assumption of Texas's debt. The American Anti-Slavery Society was formed in 1833. They met and gathered information on slavery, signed petitions, and printed and distributed propaganda to Congress and to the community. The women's rights movement also made another appearance with the idea of allowing women the right to vote. The Declaration of Sentiments was derived from this movement. Signed in 1848, this document outlined the rights that American women should be entitled to as citizens, for example, voting and equal pay. As previously done, this slide shows the notable figures in the abolition movement. William Lloyd Garrison is one of the major leaders of abolitionism, and he was the creator of the Liberator. Theodore D. Weld, husband of Angelina Grimke, was an American abolitionist and author. He wrote pamphlets such as The Bible Against Slavery in 1837 and Slavery and the Internal Slave Trade in the United States in 1841. The Tappan brothers were abolitionists who assisted in the birth of the American Anti-Slavery Society. Elizur Wright Jr. was credited with working closely with the Tappan brothers and building the AASS. Lucy Stone was the first woman to obtain a college degree in Massachusetts. She spent most of her time speaking up for women's rights, and along with Abby Kelly and 66 other women, signed the Declaration of Sentiments. Abby Kelly was the one who raised the funds for the AASS. I chose this video to give you a better understanding of the abolition movement. Manisha Sinha, a professor of history at the University of Massachusetts, gives a wonderfully detailed description of when it started and why it started.
When we think of the abolition movement, the common history textbook answer is that the abolition movement began when William Lloyd Garrison started publishing his Liberator in 1831. But the roots of American abolitionism are fairly long, and you could go back to the Revolutionary era when you had a few outstanding Quaker abolitionists. But the movement itself really takes off in the 1830s, and its roots lie amongst Quakers, one of whom Garrison served an apprenticeship under, amongst the Black tradition of protest that really comes together in the decade before Garrison. African Americans reject repatriation to Africa, and they demand citizenship rights. That's something that Garrison gets from the Black community, free Blacks in the North. And of course, he is influenced by international events. He is also influenced by the British, who have moved towards immediatism in the 1820s. That is the immediate, uncompensated abolition of slavery. So those are the two new things that really give birth to the abolition movement in the antebellum period. One is the immediate, uncompensated abolition of slavery, and the second is political and citizenship rights for African Americans in this country. That's very different from the sort of amorphous anti-slavery sentiment that had existed in the country earlier.
To end Chapter 11, nearing the 1850s was the rise of the anti-slavery parties. The Liberty Party began in 1840. They were a branch who broke away from the AASS Society. Their largest argument was that the Constitution was an illegal document because it denied African Americans their freedom. The Whigs and Democrats were much like the Republicans and Democrats today. Their views were polar opposites. The Whigs believed in a federal government, while Democrats believed in a state government. The second party system came about in 1828. It was the political system used and aided in the voting process. Lastly, the Free Soil Party was a political party comprised mainly of anti-slavery members. Its main purpose was to stop slavery from spreading into the West. My last set of important figures correlate with the political slide. James G. Birney was a presidential nominee for the Liberty Party, but was beat by James K. Polk. Salmon Chase was a Whig who switched over to the Liberty Party, but ended in the Free Soil Party. He is famous for recruiting Martin Van Buren. John Hale was a Democrat who switched sides to the Free Soil Party. Henry Clay is noted for leading the passage of the Missouri Compromise. William Stewart was a Whig who signed laws that aided Blacks and fugitive slaves. Daniel Webster, a Whig, helped build the Republican Party for John Quincy Adams. And lastly, we have Gerrit Smith, a member of the Free Soil Party and involved in the temperance movement. All of the events explained were and are important to learning American history, because without them, where would America be today? Growth and industry were needed to assist the people out of recession. People needed jobs. The expansion of religion was important because it allowed believers in Christ to achieve the goals of salvation. During a time when there was hardly any hope, this gave them someone to believe in. Slavery allows us today to see the hardships of others and to assist us in eliminating racism altogether. And politics is important because without a system in place, there would be complete chaos. Thank you very much for listening. My next 2 slides are my references. Let me move my face so you can see my references. And I thank you very much.